Hello, and welcome to our webinar, Real-Time Procurement Analytics for an Improved Bottom Line. I'm Julie, and I'll be your host. Joining me today, all the way from India, is Shobhik Banerjee, our product line owner for Ignio Cognitive Procurement. He will be sharing how you can autonomously optimize spend, reduce your operations costs, and improve compliance. But before I turn it over to Shobhik, let me first begin with the usual FAQ on the recording and questions, followed by a quick overview on Digitate. We are recording this webinar. The recording will be hosted on digitate.com under our Resources tab in the event you'd like to share it with your colleagues post-event. Also, we have allotted time at the end of this webinar for your questions. If you have questions at any time throughout the webinar, please submit them in the chat box for me, and we will get to as many as we can after the presentation. If we are not able to get to your question, not to worry, we will reply to you offline. So let's jump into that overview I mentioned. Digitate launched in 2015. Our flagship product is Ignio, and over the last 5 years, we have expanded the product into a suite of now 6 products, most of which are available as SaaS. We have amassed more than 175, mostly Fortune 500 customers across all verticals and geos, and we've been granted more than 80 patents in artificial intelligence, machine learning, intelligent automation, and knowledge engineering. We are headquartered in Santa Clara, California, so if there are any Silicon Valley locals on this webinar, you can see the Ignio building just off of Highway 101 at Great America Parkway. So with that, let's get to the heart of the content. Over to you, Shobhik.
Thank you, Julie. So hello, everyone, and thanks for joining this webinar. So I'll be walking you through a concept which we call as continuous monitoring of procurement. And so before I get there, let me put down some context here. So as we all understand, procurement is actually a vast area which typically has these 2 broad sectors, which is source to contract and procure to pay. And you would typically find different kinds of systems in play. Now, while we have lots of suites out there in the market which can possibly do all of these things, there are also several point solutions out there which you might find deployed in different customer organizations. And so a characteristic of a procurement landscape would be you would have different stakeholders, procurement department itself, the finance department, people from supply chain, several applications potentially in play. And with several applications, you typically have siloed analytics and automation efforts available as well. Now, there are 3 core challenges that possibly stand out in this space. The first is getting even more cost reduction because, it is never enough. And so people typically want to go down the path of spend optimization more and more. The second is what kind of stuff or what kind of value can you provide beyond cost reduction, right? So typically in the areas of cycle time or in the areas of business responsiveness, what can a chief procurement officer bring to the table? And the third is how to increase the speed of procurement without necessarily increasing risk. Right? Now, while they might look like simple challenges, we understand they are not. And sometimes they are, they oppose each other. And that's what makes it very difficult. So what we've done is we've kind of brought in a product in the market, which we call as Ignio Cognitive Procurement. And this is a product which is in the analytics space within procurement. And here is our point of view on where we believe a product like this possibly can add a lot of value. So if you think of analytics synonymously as intelligence, there are 2 aspects of intelligence that you can keep in mind, right? One is the recency of the intelligence, as in how old or how current is that intel. And the other aspect is how deep is that intelligence? Is it coming out of siloed data sets or is it coming out of connected sort of data sets, right? And if you think about the traditional approach to analysis, it is what I would call as periodic analysis, where you take the data out of different systems at some periods, right? So like it could be a weekly, monthly, or quarterly and you start analyzing that data using slice and dice techniques, fundamentally to understand who are you spending with, how much are you spending, where are you spending on, with the sole intent of figuring out how can you optimize spend, right? But by and large, I would say the traditional approach is that of a periodic analysis. And our belief is that with the kind of technology available today, and specifically with the product that I'm going to talk about today, it's possible to get into a space of continuous analysis where you are looking at transactions on a daily basis, possibly even in a near real-time basis, where you're looking for opportunities or problems in pretty much near real time. And you not only detect these opportunities and problems, but you also bring in an ability to intercept the transactions in real time, such that you can either correct anomaly or prevent the anomaly from happening. And in case it's an opportunity, you get a chance to sort of cash in. Right? And so our belief is that this fundamental shift from a periodic analysis in this space to what we call as continuous analysis is possible today. And if I go a little deeper and sort of elaborate on what do I mean by continuous analysis, there are two aspects of continuous analysis. One is what I call as continuous exploration, where you do look at historical data from the space and you continuously scout for opportunities and options. And you do that fundamentally by connecting data sets. You do that using AI/ML techniques so that you can mine deeper insights. So that's one aspect of the continuous analysis. The other aspect is the continuous monitoring of transactions, such that you can detect and intercept anomalies, right? And so here we think the ability to sort of bring in different kinds of controls that you would like to monitor, or different kind of trends that you'd like to monitor and action upon, is the name of the game. And our belief is if you do this, it sets the foundation for enterprises to eventually adapt to procurement opportunities and problems pretty much autonomously, right? And you do this brick by brick. The idea is not to sort of, go and make autonomous procurement a reality in the first shot, but you try to chip away at this and look at specific areas where you could possibly discover insights, decide on the right actions, and possibly even trigger the right actions, right? And so that's essentially the idea based on which we have built this particular product. And so let me, at this point, switch over and give you a glimpse of what this product looks like and what do I mean really by continuous analysis, right? So as you can see here, this is the login screen of our product, and this essentially is our mantra. Our mantra is explore, monitor, and intercept, right? So if I log in, I'll elaborate on what I mean by that. So this particular product is built around two broad sort of modules, right? We have something called as a command center, whose sole focus is to monitor transactions in near real time, and you detect anomalies, detect opportunities, and you trigger appropriate actions. And that's what you do on the command center side. On the exploration center side, you are looking at historical transactions, but you're looking at it through different lenses. So you might be looking at the effect of price variance, where the same item is being bought at different price points from different vendors. Question is, can you go in and identify which are these items which have significant price variance? Can you figure out what is the right price point for such items? And then can you monitor such items on an ongoing basis, right? So there are separate lenses through which you can go in and look at historical data using interesting AI/ML techniques, which I'll elaborate on. But let me possibly start with the command center and show you how we envision a command center to function in future. So in the procurement space, like I said, you have the source to contract and the procure to pay side. What I'm showing you here is more on the procure to pay side, where you typically have a purchase request, which eventually becomes a purchase order, goes on to have a receipt note, and then an invoice, right, which eventually gets settled. And so you have these critical stages of a PR or a purchase request, a PO or a purchase order, and then invoices. And so technically, if you really want to monitor transactions in near real time, every stage of a transaction presents a set of opportunities in terms of what do you want to monitor and what kind of value do you want to add. So let's go inside and look at if you're going to monitor, for example, purchase orders in near real time. What are various types of controls that you could put in place? So as you can see, we have essentially created this dashboard. And this dashboard is very different from a classic data visualization sort of a dashboard that you might have seen, where you see lots of charts and graphs, and it's up to you to decide how do you interpret those charts and graphs. We have taken a different route. We have said that if you really want a command center, it has to be controls oriented. And so every control is very specific. It gives you a very specific kind of insight, and it gives you a very specific kind of recommendation. So let me explain this page. As you can see, you have 4 sections. We have a spotlight section, we have a quick catch section, we have a key metrics section, and we have a trends and a forecast section. Right? So we've created this command center in a sort of a templatized form. And the spotlight section essentially allows you to choose a metric or a control rather that is the most important control for that particular stage. So in this case, let's say since we're talking about POs, it's all about how much money can you save, for instance, by reducing maverick purchases, right? Now, the section below that you see as a quick catch section is another section which has a bunch of controls, as you can see. Each control brings a different kind of insight to the surface. So you have a control which talks about predicted fulfillment delays. So this is talking about which are the POs which are at a risk of getting delayed in terms of fulfillment. Right? You have a control which is essentially tracking non-compliance to procurement policy. You have another control which is essentially looking at whether the commodity tagging that you've done inside the PO, is that really correct, or should it be updated, right? Or you're catching duplicate requests, split requests. You're essentially looking at POs that are going through with vendors with a very low reliability score, and I'll elaborate on that a little later, right? Overdue purchase orders, POs that are coming in without a purchase request, right? So several controls that come out of the box. And as you can see, we can have a bunch of key metrics here. Again, we give a catalog from where you can pick and choose. And then we have some trends here. For instance, you want to keep your eye on overdue orders and how is that number varying this year and how is it compared to, let's say, last year. So now let's go a little deeper into a particular control and see how this command center works. So let's pick up an example. Let's say we are looking at this control of predicted fulfillment delays. When you click on this, it expands and shows you these are the total number of POs which are at a risk of getting delayed, and this is the total amount at stake. It shows you the bucketing of these POs by value and by quantity along certain delay buckets. And then when you click on view details here, it takes you down to the lowest level, and it shows you all these 500 POs that are at a risk of getting delayed, right? So it's listed in a tabular format here. You can filter on this list by the delay buckets, right? But you can actually go even further and go down to a particular PO and go to the last level where it will show you a particular PO number. It will give you the details about the PO. And it gives you 3 interesting things, right? It gives you a specific insight on that PO. So it's saying that this particular PO is likely to be delayed by 3 days. It gives you a very specific recommendation on what should you do about it. And it gives you a button to trigger an associated action, right? So if you click on this button, it can send the vendor a proactive notification indicating that our system is saying that this particular PO is likely to get delayed. Is there any cause of concern, for instance, right? Now, these actions, out here, it's a non-intrusive kind of an action where you are just sending out a notification. But these actions could also be fairly intrusive actions where you could essentially update the purchase order in the underlying e-procurement software, right? And so, this is a software that is obviously not a core system of record, which is used to sort of key in your purchase requests or purchase orders. This is the kind of software that sits on top as an overlay, and it takes the transactional data from an e-procurement software or an e-sourcing software as input, and it crunches the data, generates the output, generates the insights, and it allows you to take an action either directly, let's say a notification to a vendor, or something that is, like I said, more intrusive, where you get to update the PO in the underlying e-procurement system, right? So let me give you an example of that as well. So let's say you pick up another control here, which is essentially looking at wrong commodity tagging. Now what happens is, many times at the point of creating the purchase order, let's say somebody has given a categorization of that particular item that is being purchased. But here you get a chance of challenging that through, let's say, an AI model which is working behind things, which has a second jab at classifying the item into the right category. And let's say the accuracy percentage is very high. You can challenge the original tagging and say that I think the tagging itself is incorrect. And in which case, if you drill down, if you see it's the same templatized approach, it will tell you which are the purchase orders where it is suspecting that the commodity tagging is incorrect. You go down to the lowest level, you look at the purchase orders, and then when you bring up the purchase order, again, it tells you that there is an incorrect tagging here. It recommends what is the right tagging, and it gives you an ability to hit a button called Update PO, which essentially would send this correct tagging down below into the e-procurement software. Right? So this would be an example of an intrusive sort of an action. Right? So now we have essentially done a bunch of controls, and some of these controls could be rules-based. So examples, for example, if you have a duplicate request kind of a control, it's essentially a rule-based control which you can configure and deploy pretty much instantaneously. You have something called as pattern-based controls, right? So for instance, if I'm predicting delays, it is based on some observed patterns from historical data, and I'll explain that in a bit, that also the software allows you to do. Or you could have controls which are powered by direct AI models, like a wrong commodity tagging, where you essentially pass a transaction to an AI model, and it comes back to you with a classification and essentially a recommendation on whether it is correct or wrong, right? So we kind of built these kinds of controls. Similarly, if you see the trend side, we've kind of given a bunch of trends out of the box. And these trends are also drillable. Once you get in, let's say you're looking at overdue orders, you can look at a year-to-date view, a 6-month view. You can sort of pull a particular area and sort of zoom in. You could overlay other trends on top of it and see how a particular trend is shaping up as compared to other trends, and is there a cause of concern? So are the peaks sort of aligning, are the troughs aligning, and do you want any takeaways from that? And then depending on the section that is under review, let's say this particular section, you can see what some of the other parameters are showing up in that period, right? So who are the maximum, who are the buyers who purchased the maximum during that period? Who are the vendors who supplied you the maximum during that period? Again, have certain kinds of overlays that are available on top of the trends graph, right? So in some sense, your analysis of historical data can become fairly sort of interactive, right? But the key idea here is essentially these controls, right? The more controls you bring in, the more the better kind of a surveillance you put in place for the overall procurement function. Now these controls are very, very contextual to the stage, like I said, because we are talking of a purchase order here. Things like fulfillment delays become important, non-compliance become important, commodity taggings become important. But let's say you go slightly left of the process, pretty earlier in the process, where a PO has not yet been created, and you are dealing with purchase requests. Here, as you can see, the controls change, right? Because different things become important here, right? So I might give you a recommendation for, here are a bunch of purchase requests where the system is recommending that it is better you go through an RFQ process because the value of that purchase order is fairly high, and maybe there is a company policy that is recommending that you go down that path. But then if you go down the path of an RFQ, whom do you call to the table, right? So when you if you drill down here and get down to the list of purchase requests where we are recommending that you go down the path of an RFQ, if you go deep inside the purchase request, we start making recommendations on which vendors to possibly invite and float an RFQ to. And that essentially becomes the basis for triggering an action like create an event and invite these people to the table, right? So the controls essentially change depending on the stage of procure to pay that you are in. And likewise, if you go to the right, let's say you're looking at invoices, for instance, there are a completely different set of controls here, right? So here, the most important control becomes, let's say, early payment discounts, which fundamentally means that as your invoices start hitting you, a classical approach would be to handle them in a first in, first out basis. But let's say technology were able to guide you that why don't you process those invoices first, where you stand to gain some early payment discount. And so the software starts to guide you that you have only 1 day left for these 5 invoices. If you clear them in the next 1 day, you stand to gain some money. You have another 10 invoices for which you have a little more time left, about 7 days. And so it is urging you to sort of clear these invoices and save some money. And then you have other kinds of controls here, as you can see, predicted delayed payments. Again, this is a big problem. Lots of people have invoice backlogs because the amount of validations that are required at that last stage typically take a lot of time and you start to miss your payment terms. So any kind of payments that are likely to get missed, again, on the back of patterns, you start to sort of show them. You can also report on things which are post facto, but the whole idea is to sort of keep you on your toes and keep showing the aging. And you can also do things like three-way mismatches, duplicate invoices as an interesting area because it's an area through which a lot of leakage happens many times in organizations. And so, this is essentially what we mean by a command center. Essentially, a bunch of controls that you keep your eye on. It's giving you a real-time view. It allows you to drill down to a transaction level, and it allows you to take appropriate action. Right? Now, it is understandable that the list of controls is going to grow over a period of time. Right? And so, since you possibly cannot squeeze all controls on a page, we have provided the ability to sort of extend it along pages, very similar to like a Microsoft OneNote. So when you hit on add, you can sort of create your page of controls. You can say, this is my page. I want to pick this particular metric or this particular control here. I want to pick a set of controls in the quick cap section. I can choose up to 15. I can pick up a bunch of metrics here in the key metrics section. I can pick up a few trends here. And then when I say next, it gives you a preview of how your page is going to look like. You can move around these trends or you can move around these tiles and arrange them in the way that you want to. And once you say save page, you actually have your own page of controls. Now this is interesting because as the list of controls grows for a particular process, you can have pages which are theme-based collection of controls, right? So you can have a page which is showing you controls related to only savings. Or you could have a page which is showing you a bunch of controls related to only reducing cycle, right? And so it's completely on you on how you want to arrange these controls along these pages and sort of monitor them. And just to keep in mind that for large organizations, this can be a humongous job to have a view top-down in real time. And so on top of the privilege-based access to what you can see, we have given a filtering ability so you can look at maybe a particular region or a particular category or a particular, a plant or a business unit. That level of filtering is available. So what you're seeing could be a particular view or a particular slice of operations. But the whole idea is to sort of keep, stay one step ahead of operations and ensure that you can plug a leakage or a non-compliance before it starts to cause serious damage. Right? So that's essentially what we do on the command center side. Now the interesting thing is, how does the command center come into being, right? So several things that I showed you here they come into being on the back of what we call as the exploration center. So the exploration center is where you look at historical data to understand what is good, what is bad, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, what is normal, what is abnormal. Because once you understand the procurement behavior of an organization through this side, it allows you to decide what is it you want to monitor on the command center side. So in some sense, whatever you discover through your exploration center becomes the basis for monitoring the command center. Right? So let me show you an example of something that we do here. So let's say I have a module here called Maverick Analysis, and this allows you to sort of look at a set of historical transactions, and you can analyze the transactions from a database, or you can upload some transactions through a CSV file. You can sort of go to the next stage, sort of do some mapping, right? And then you enter some remarks and you submit it for analysis. And it gives you a reference number and it submits it for analysis. And you can see that your request runs for a certain period of time here. It will show you what is the percentage complete. Once it is done, it comes back to you with a report which you can look at. So as you can see, it has actually used some algorithms under the hood in a very seamless manner for a business user. All the business user needs to know how to use the interface that I just showed. And it straight away comes back and tells you what is the amount of saving potential for the period of data that it has just analyzed. It's saying that I've analyzed these many number of transactions. In these number of transactions, these were the total number of unique items. Of these, there were some 250 items that it has labeled as Mavericks, and it's that you can save this amount of money. And it's also listing all these 250 Maverick items for review out here, right? So each record here is and once you deep inside it, it's going to show you for this particular item, what is the saving potential, how much to spend, and it's going to show you on what basis it has come up what it is calling as a recommended price, saying that this is an item where if you buy at this particular price point going forward, there is a substantial amount of money that you can save, right? And how did it arrive at this? It uses some clustering algorithm here to show you, these are clusters of transactions which have gone through at an average price point of $204. Here is another cluster of transactions where the price point was higher, and another cluster even higher, right? And so it does the clustering. It shows you these clusters in a tabular format here as well. You can drill down into these clusters and look at which were the transactions that made up that cluster, which was the plant that essentially bought at that price point, which is the vendor that is selling it to you at that price, and so on and so forth, right? So in some sense, it mines from data which are those items which seem to have a significant price variance. For those items, it recommends a particular price point. It tells you how much money you can save on an average. And it also allows you to override this, right? So as a user, I could say, well, I don't think it's always possible to buy it at this price point. I think 250 is possibly a more palatable price point. And so it recognizes that, but it still keeps, on the record what was there, right? And the beauty is you can now add, once you have done this kind of a review, you can select specific items from here and you can add them to a watch list. So what I mean by a watch list is now the software knows that these items need to be monitored using the command center. So now that these items have been added to the watch list, you can sort of come back here into the command center and look at a control, which is essentially monitoring Maverick items, right? And so in some sense, what you discovered using the exploration center became the basis for monitoring things in the command center, right? And so we've done several of these things out here. For example, we've done a exception analysis module here, which kind of mines the patterns that explain different kinds of exceptions. For example, we are looking at delivery delays, right? Again, the same style as you can see, taken data either from the database or through a CSV file as per a template that we've prescribed, sort of go to the next step, enter some remarks, run some analysis, creates an ID, submits the job gets completed, you open the report, and it shows you that it has found some 50 patterns which explain specific kinds of exceptions, right? And so if you go in and see, let's say a delay in delivery as an exception, and you drill down and look at it, it is saying that it has found a very specific pattern which explains why you end up with delays in delivery. So it's saying that out of some 800,000 records that it has analyzed, it has found 300 purchase orders which have run into delays because of a specific condition. And that condition is shown here as evidence. It's saying for these 300 purchase orders, the vendor in question was Academ, the category in question was lab equipment, the plant which made the purchase was Newark, the buyer was Grant M, and the business unit was refining. So 300 purchase orders with the same signature, and all 300 purchase orders eventually ended up in a delay. And so in some sense, using a set of scores, it is starting to recommend that if the same pattern in a new purchase transaction, so if it's a new purchase order that is coming through, where it's the same vendor, same category, same plant, same buyer, and same business unit, there is a very high likelihood that you will end up with a delay, right? And this kind of a pattern, it mines through several permutations and combinations, and you have the complete liberty to decide how many such influencers you want to pick, or for that matter, what is the exception that you want to analyze, right? So it is completely up to you to decide how you want to sort of run something like this. But the whole idea is we provide these kinds of options to sort of delve deep into data, identify items, mine patterns. We've done several things on the supplier analysis side as well, where we've come out with our own sort of calculation of what we call as a reliability score, which looks at several parameters in transactional data like price competitiveness, the quality, timeliness, popularity, financial health, which is external data, market reputation, sustainability. We've come out with a reliability score which is on a scale of 1 to 10 to essentially grade a supplier, saying, is this a supplier that I want to do business with, or do I want to reduce business with, right? And since we have kind of used certain AI models to come out with these scores, these objective scores then become the basis for, again, going back to our command center and saying, can you start flagging vendors with, let's say, a reliability score of less than 5, and I want to sort of review those pieces. Right? So this is essentially how this particular software works. So let me just go back to my slide here and bring up one slide as a conclusion before I open up for some Q&A. Is how would you bring in a software like this inside an organization, right? Because typically organizations are accustomed to, like I said, running periodic analysis, using some reporting or data visualization tools. Whereas what we are promoting here is a controls monitoring solution, which is something very different than a classical data visualization. So our recommendation is that you treat this as a journey, and there are several levels through which you can go through, where each level obviously yields higher and higher value. So it makes sense to initially start by analyzing the behavior using certain mining techniques. So what I showed as part of the exploration center would typically fall here, where you're analyzing historical data using some AI/ML techniques to figure out what drives leakage, what drives non-compliance. And that sets up the stage to sort of then move into the command center and start monitoring a set of controls, right? And these controls could be, run on the back of rules. These rules could be either human-generated or machine-generated. Some of these rules could be generated using some of this analysis. And so you start monitoring transactions, screening transactions on the back of rules. And then you gradually increase the level of sophistication and go deeper. And you say, I want to sort of now scan these transactions using patterns, right? And so these are operations that you've seen in the past. And you start to get into a predictive mode. On the back of patterns, you start to flag transactions that have possibly not yet caused a problem, but they are likely to cause problems. And you start to flag those. And that gives you an even higher value. But the end game really is to get to a stage where, let's say, you start simulating. Given that lots of things are happening, are you in a position to try out several what-if scenarios and see what is the best course of action? And that essentially is like the holy grail, sort of getting to that stage. Of course, doing this in as close to real time as possible, right? So that's essentially my thought. I'll pause here and I'll hand you back the control, Julie.
Thank you, Shovik, for that presentation. Now let's take those audience questions. As a reminder, if you have a question, please submit it in the chat box. So our first question is, how is it decided that a PO could be delayed?
Okay, so it's not coming up with a human-generated rule, like I said, that it is decided that a PO is delayed. The way we do it is we look at several historical transactions in the past where you know that there have been instances of delays. And so we typically analyze those transactions using some pattern mining algorithms. And we mine patterns that explain statistically what led to these delays, right? Are there specific patterns where specific combination of a buyer, seller, item, maybe a time of the year, that explains a majority of the delays, right? And that's how we mine patterns. And once you mine these patterns, you then monitor those patterns using the command center saying, if you see the same pattern or the same signature, because the moment a purchase order is created, you would know who's the buyer, who's the seller, what is the time of the year, what is the item, you would know all of that, right? And so it's possible to sort of do a pattern match very quickly and then say that since pattern match is accurate, you can say that likely that this particular transaction is going to run into a delay. Right? So it's not something that you cobble up as a human-generated rule, typically a pattern that is mined and then monitored.
Great. Next question is a two-part question. Can you do purchase price trending by a commodity or product, and can you lay indexes against them?
Yes, you can. This is something that I don't have in the product right now. It's in our roadmap and we're working on it. But absolutely, I mean, a purchase price trending and forecasting is something that is absolutely doable with a product like this. And our belief is once that comes in, it calls for another interesting set of controls that you can put around it, right? In terms of, is it the right time to buy, or should you hold on the buy decision for 2 more days because you're anticipating that the price is going to go down, things like that. So yes, doable, but it's in the roadmap that we're working on.
Great. Next question. What is the licensing model for this product?
So this product is available in a pure SaaS model, and there are 2 versions that are available, or rather 2 packages that are available. We have a standard package and we have an advanced package. The standard package gives you access to the exploration center that I showed you today, which allows you to analyze historical data using AI/ML techniques and mining deep insights. The advanced package gives you access to the exploration center and the command center, right? And so since it's a SaaS model, there's an annual subscription fee. That annual subscription fee entitles you to a certain amount of capacity. When I say capacity, I mean the number of transactions that I'm willing to screen or analyze. And so you get a capacity of, let's say, 15 million transactions. And every time you run an analysis or every time you screen, we run a counter against it. If you use up the capacity before the end of your subscription period, you can go for boosted packs. If you don't use it up, then you lose it, right? And so it's as simple as that. So it's a plain subscription model in a SaaS.
Great. Next question. How are we collecting data to do analysis, and are you using adapters to connect applications like Oracle, SAP, or other third-party apps?
Correct. So great question. So we have 2 ways in which information can get into our database. One, as you rightly said, is adapters. And yes, we are building adapters with different kinds of systems. But we understand that when you deploy a product like this inside an organization, building the adapter cannot become a stumbling block to adoption. And so which is the reason we have intentionally kept a second way of ingesting data into our database, which is through a simple UI screen like I showed you. You can offer data to us in a simple .csv format. We give you a template and we allow you to upload that data in our database directly and then run analysis. So you have both options. Yes, have adapters, but you also have the ability to start working with this tool with simple .csv files.
Great. And I'm getting a few questions around integration. So does this application integrate with other products such as SAP for HANA or Ariba?
Yes. Yes. So that is precisely the point, and that is important for us, right? Because since we are not the custodian of transactions, we will always be sitting on top of an e-procurement or an e-sourcing tool. And we understand that there are various tools out there in the market, SAP, Ariba, Coupa, all kinds of software are out there. Even there are homegrown systems that a lot of people have. So yes, absolutely. We will connect with whatever you have on your side and make this work.
Great. Can you talk a little bit about the key factors that differentiate this from other procurement products?
Yeah, so great question again. So I think there are a couple of things that sets us apart. So the first thing is, like I said, this is not a reporting tool or a data visualization tool, and the reason I say that is because we've taken the approach of controls and controls monitoring. So everything that you saw in the command center is specific controls which are aimed at surfacing either an anomaly or surfacing an opportunity. And these are all closed loop sort of controls, right? In the sense, it's not about just presenting an insight and leaving it there. We also go down to the lowest level at a transaction level. We recommend an action, and we also allow you an ability to trigger an action, right? And so this whole combination of controls monitoring, which is continuous, coupled with the fact that it's closed loop, then it's a combination of insights as well as action, is what I would say differentiates this from other products. And of course, I mean, it is very different from the classic general data visualization tools out there because that has been created specifically for procurement. And so we've taken special care to ensure that it can be used by a business user. There is no need for that business user to turn to IT for anything. As you can see, it is already available as SaaS, and the entire user interface, as you saw, has been created for a business user. So the business user doesn't need to go to a data scientist, turn to IT, doesn't need to understand how algorithms work. It has been created specifically for a community of users who can sort of use it completely by themselves. So I guess those are some of the points which sets it apart from some generic sort of visualization tools or generic analytics tools which kind of just stay at analytics and don't go down to the point of closing the loop and taking actions.
Okay, great. Let's just do, let's go ahead and do a couple more. Who is the target user of this product? Do I need to involve a technical person to use it?
No. So the target user, so the exploration center, I would say, is to be used by people who are analyzing your procurement today. So they might be analytics teams in case you have invested in them. They could be category managers who are essentially looking at who they procure from, how much do they procure, are there opportunities to save, right? So category managers, analytics teams would use the exploration center. The command center, where you are monitoring transactions in near real time, our belief is that, you can possibly give this to your analytics teams, but I think it will create a new role because within the space of procurement, the whole aspect of a command center is possibly not rampant, which is the case in some other domains. For instance, if you think about a security operations center or a network operations center, where the whole of a command center is pretty real and has been around for a long time. In the space of procurement, we are introducing this as a new concept, saying that it's time to possibly put a procurement operations center. And eventually, I believe it will require people to make a little bit of investment in keeping a small team which is monitoring procurement on a day-to-day basis and in a near real-time basis. But to start with, I think analytics teams that you have could develop and start off with this role till you get to a critical mass. But no, you don't need to turn to any technical person for sure, for any part.
Okay, perfect. Next question. Can we adopt this in manufacturing, for example, in automobile parts procurement?
Yes, you can. So this particular product that I'm talking about, obviously nuances by industry, and manufacturing would have its own nuances, a bank would have its own nuances. So absolutely, a manufacturer could adopt something like this inside their organization. Absolutely, the answer is yes.
Great. Next question, let's take just a few more. You mentioned controls. Where or how are these controls implemented?
So the controls typically, obviously, are our IP, and so we have, some functional expertise within the product development team, and so we have been coming out with our own catalog of controls that we believe would be useful to this community, the procurement community. And so, like I said, the way this product is, let's say it comes out with a set of 25 controls to start with, and you have the ability to pick and choose the controls that you want to configure and start monitoring at your end. As far as we are concerned, from a product perspective, every quarterly release that we make in the market, we are going to update that list of controls, and we're going to, let's say the 25 becomes 50, the 50 becomes 75, and that's how I anticipate this is going to grow. Interestingly, because we are having this as a multi-tenant SaaS application, be a lot of cross-pollination of knowledge as different customers start to put different kinds of controls in play. I think there can be a good cross-pollination of this knowledge, and this list can grow. But to answer your question straight, we have a list that we are coming out with. When we engage with customers, we are open to discussing with them to understand what more controls might be useful for them. Some of those controls might already be part of our roadmap, in which case we can work on reprioritizing them and deploying them for a customer. In some cases, you might come out with some new controls, and in which case we can figure out a way to factor them into our roadmap. That's how they will come into being.
Great. Next question. Different items require different times to be packaged and delivered. How does ignio Cognitive Procurement show a more problematic item before a non-problematic item?
Sorry, I missed that question. Can you repeat that, Julie? I missed the initial part.
Yes, I think it's talking more about prediction. How can the product show a more problematic item over something that's not as problematic?
Okay, so the way, because there is an algorithm running under the hood, the algorithm will look at it only mathematically, right? So like I said, in the case of a Maverick item, since it is focused on analyzing the aspect of price variance, it's going to surface up those items which seem to have a significant amount of price variance as compared to other items, and it's going to label those as more problematic, right? And so those come up to the top. But you as a subject matter expert can decide that it's not just about numbers. There are certain other nuances that come in. But for the moment, it's going to do this distinction between which ones are more problematic versus others purely mathematically, right? I mean, it's the quantum of price variance that will dictate which one is more problematic as compared to others.
Okay. Next question, how do we factor in E&M positions for procurement as rates keep on changing with time?
Yeah, so typically what we recommend is the exploration center that I talked about is not a one-time exercise, right? So typically what we recommend customers is every month you should rerun the analysis that you're doing on a rolling 12-month basis. And so let's say at the beginning of November, you should look at the last 12 months data from, rolling back from November, from the beginning of November. And you should run your Maverick analysis again. You should run your pattern mining again, because all of these things, like you rightly said, prices change, even patterns change, right, for that matter, right? Some patterns which were prevalent a year ago will die, and then new patterns will sort of come in. So the recommendation is, since this is an ongoing process, you have the exploration center where you do this at some frequency. Recommended is monthly. One could choose to do it quarterly if you think that time frame is good enough. And then you refresh the watch lists that are powering the command center in that frequency as well. So yes, you have to do this at some frequency. It's not a one-time fire and forget.
Okay. Let's go ahead and take one more question because I'm seeing this a few times. Can you talk a little bit about the implementation timeline?
So the implementation timeline actually is pretty short, right? So because this is SaaS, I mean, from the time you sign an order form, in a week's time, you will get access to the software, and it'll be set up for you, right? And when I say set up for you, I don't mean the integrations with your source system. The software will become available to you, right? Now, like I said, you can start using the software without having the necessary adapters with your source systems, because we give you an ability to ingest data through the front end using .csv files, right? So technically, you can start using the product immediately. But the place where it will take time is, a little bit of time is when you're initially getting into a new organization, you need to get some amount of historical data, like I said, let's say 6 to 12 months of data, to understand what is good, what is abnormal. So you might want to run one pass of a Maverick analysis, one pass of exception analysis, and select what are the things that you really monitor and populate the command center basis that, and then start using the command center. But getting back to your primary question of how quickly can you start using the software, it's a matter of what, 1 or 2 weeks, right? Because it's SaaS, so deployment doesn't take time, and because integrations are not a prerequisite, you get to start using it almost instantaneously.
Great. Thank you, Shobhik. That's going to conclude our webinar for today. Thank you so much, Shobhik, for presenting to our lovely audience so late in your day, or I should say early in the morning now. Everyone, please be sure to bookmark. Please be sure to bookmark our resources page on digitate.com for all of our webinar recordings at digitate.com/webinars. Thank you so much for joining us. Stay healthy and stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Really appreciate it.